She wasn't begging. She wasn't crying. She was just tired. And when that little girl asked to sell her bike for food, the men everyone feared most in town decided to do something no one expected. The sky over Tuscaloosa, Alabama was heavy that afternoon, gray and humid, like it was thinking about raining but couldn't make up its mind. The parking lot of Marley's Diner was half full, lined with mud-splattered trucks and a row of shiny motorcycles that caught the faint glimmer of daylight. The smell of fried catfish and gasoline hung in the air. A group of 6 bikers stood near the diner's entrance, laughing between sips of cold soda. Their leather vests bore the name Iron Hounds. Loud, intimidating, but not bad people. Just men who'd seen enough of life to stop caring about how they looked to others. At the center of the group stood Reed Lawson, the kind of man people didn't make eye contact with for too long. He was in his early 40s, tall and broad, with gray streaks in his beard and a scar cutting across his left eyebrow. A reminder of a fight no one dared to ask about. Reed was telling a story about a highway breakdown when something unusual caught his attention. Out of the corner of his eye, he noticed a small figure walking across the lot. Slow, hesitant, almost unsure she was allowed to be there. A little black girl, no older than 10, with messy braids and a faded pink shirt that had once been bright. She was pushing a small, scratched-up bicycle beside her, its chain rattling softly with each step. The bikers went quiet, one by one, until even Reed stopped talking. The girl stopped a few feet away from them, holding onto the handlebars like they were her only protection. She looked up at Reed, her eyes big, brown, and scared, but also filled with something else, something heavy. Excuse me, sir, she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. Would you buy my bike? Reed frowned, confused. Buy your bike? What for, sweetheart? You look like you still need it. The little girl swallowed hard and looked down at the ground. Mommy hasn't eaten in 2 days. The words hit the air like a brick. No one said anything. The sound of a motorcycle revving on the other side of the street felt far away now. Reed took a slow step forward, crouching down so he could see her face better. What's your name, kid? Alea, she said quietly. Alea Brooks. Well, Alea, Reed said gently, where's your mama now? She's at home, the girl replied. She told me not to leave, but I wanted to help. One of the bikers, a tall man with tattoos all down his arms named Duke, rubbed the back of his neck. Man, this ain't right, he muttered under his breath. Reed stood up straight, thinking. There was something about the girl. The dirt on her shoes, the way her voice trembled, the desperation behind her eyes, that made it impossible to ignore. He'd seen tough men break down over less. Reed looked around at his crew. Y'all got cash on you? A few of them nodded. One guy pulled out a crumpled 20. Another dug into his vest pocket. Reed reached for his wallet, but paused. Hold on, he said slowly. Buying that bike's not the point. If this kid's telling the truth, something's wrong at home. Real wrong. Alea's lip trembled, and she blinked fast, trying not to cry. Mommy said we'll be okay, but she lies when her tummy growls. I can hear it. Reed's throat tightened. He didn't even know this kid, but something in that moment felt personal. Like the universe had put her in his path for a reason. He knelt again. Alea, can you take us to your mama? She hesitated, clutching her bike tighter. You won't be mad at her? Reed shook his head. No, ma'am. We just want to make sure she's okay. The little girl studied him for a second like she was trying to decide if he was telling the truth. Then she gave a small nod. Okay, she said, but it's kind of far. I can show you. Reed turned to his men. Mount up, he said. We're going for a little ride. The bikers exchanged glances, curious, concerned, but ready. None of them knew what they were about to find, but one thing was clear. They weren't letting that little girl walk home alone. Alea climbed onto her bike, gripping the handlebars tight as the engines roared to life behind her. She started pedaling, the bikers rolling slowly behind her in a loose formation, following the small pink bike through the streets of Tuscaloosa. Something told Reed this ride was about to change everything, but he had no idea just how deep the pain behind that little girl's words really went. The engines growled low as the Iron Hounds rolled out of the diner's parking lot, following the little girl on her pink bike. The contrast was jarring. 6 loud motorcycles surrounding one small child pedaling down cracked asphalt. Reed stayed close behind her, his eyes fixed on the back of her head. Her braids bounced with every turn of the pedals, and her tiny backpack, torn at the seams, looked far too light for a kid who'd said her mama hadn't eaten in 2 days. The group moved slow, careful not to scare her. Locals stopped to stare. It wasn't every day you saw a convoy of bikers escorting a little girl through town. They passed the old water tower, the closed-down gas station, the church with the fading white cross. Tuscaloosa was the kind of place where people noticed everything, but didn't always say anything. Duke pulled up beside Reed at a red light. "Man, you sure about this?" he shouted over the rumble. "We don't even know what's going on." Reed didn't look over. "I ain't sure about anything, but you heard her." Duke sighed. "Yeah, I did." He glanced at the girl up ahead. "Kid's tougher than most grown folks I know." Aliyah turned around once just to make sure they were still there. When she saw they were, she smiled. Barely, but enough to make Reed's chest tighten. She led them across the bridge near the river, then down a quieter road lined with small houses and dying lawns. A few dogs barked as the bikes rolled by. Finally, she turned onto a narrow gravel path behind a grocery store. The bikers slowed down. Aliyah pointed. "It's over there." At the end of the path stood a rundown apartment building with peeling paint and boarded-up windows. Half the mailboxes were broken. The grass was gone, replaced by patches of dirt and trash. Reed killed his engine and got off his bike. "You live here, kid?" She nodded, setting her bike down. "Second floor, but we don't got power no more. Mama says it's okay, though. Candles smell nice." The men exchanged uneasy glances. Reed followed her up the creaky wooden stairs. The other bikers stayed close, the air heavy with the kind of silence that makes your skin itch. When they reached the door, Aliyah knocked softly. "Mama?" "It's me." No answer. She tried again. "Mama, I brought people." From inside came a weak voice. "Aliyah? Baby, who did you bring?" The door opened just a crack. A woman stood there, frail and pale, with dark circles under her eyes. Her hair was tied back in a loose bun, and her clothes hung off her like they were borrowed from someone else. Reed took off his sunglasses. "Ma'am," he said gently, "we don't mean no trouble. Your daughter came up to us at the diner, said you hadn't eaten." Danielle blinked slowly, embarrassed. She shouldn't have done that. I told her not to worry." Her voice cracked. Reed could tell she was trying to sound strong, but her body was giving her away. Aliyah stepped closer and took her mother's hand. "Mama, they're nice. They wanted to help." For a moment, no one spoke. Then Danielle's eyes filled with tears. She tried to say something, but only a whisper came out. "We're fine." Reed looked around the apartment. The dim light, the half-empty shelves, the stack of unpaid bills on the counter. He saw an old cereal box turned upside down on the table. Not even crumbs left. Duke stepped inside behind him. "This ain't fine, ma'am." "Not even close." Danielle turned away, ashamed. "I just lost my job, that's all. Things will get better." Reed crouched beside the table, staring at the worn eviction notice pinned to the wall. "When's rent due?" "Last week," she whispered. Reed exhaled through his nose. "Who's your landlord?" Her lips pressed together like she didn't want to say. Then she finally whispered a name, one that made Reed's head snap up. "Say that again." She said it louder this time. The other bikers froze. They knew that name. Everyone in town did. Reed stood slowly, his jaw tightening. "You mean to tell me he's the one who did this?" Danielle nodded, her voice trembling. "He took everything. Said we were behind on payments, but I had proof I wasn't. He wouldn't listen." Aliyah hugged her mother's waist. "He yelled at her," she said softly. "He said he'd make sure we'd never live here again." The room went quiet. Reed's men shifted uneasily, exchanging looks that said more than words ever could. Reed turned toward the door. "Get the bikes ready." Duke frowned. "Reed, what are you—" Reed cut him off. "We're going to have a little talk with an old friend." But none of them knew that the man they were about to confront wasn't just greedy. He was dangerous, and what he'd done went deeper than anyone could have guessed. The afternoon sun was fading fast, leaving streaks of orange cutting through the broken blinds in Danielle Brooks's apartment. The air was thick, not just from the heat, but from the weight of everything unsaid. Reed stood in the middle of the small living room, looking around quietly. It wasn't much. A couch with torn fabric, a coffee table missing a leg, and a few photos taped to the wall instead of framed. One picture showed Danielle holding Alaya when she was a baby, both of them smiling, both of them clean, healthy, happy. It felt like a lifetime ago. Alaya sat cross-legged on the floor, clutching a stuffed bear that had lost an eye. She looked up at Reed. "You really gonna talk to him, mister?" Reed nodded. "Yes, sweetheart. We're..." Danielle stepped closer, her voice soft but firm. "Please don't. You don't know what that man's capable of." Reed turned toward her. "I know enough. You said his name. Terry Vance, right?" Her eyes widened slightly. "You know him?" Reed let out a dry laugh. "Know him? Lady, I used to ride with him, long time ago, before he traded his leather jacket for a suit and started pretending he was better than everyone." Duke leaned against the doorframe. "Terry Vance owns half this side of town now, runs some real estate company, but everyone knows he's dirty, buys up foreclosed homes cheap and throws folks out." Danielle's shoulders slumped. "He tricked me. Said my rent checks were late, but I showed him my receipts. He told me they were missing from his records. And next thing I know, he had a sheriff's notice taped to my door." Reed clenched his fists. "That sounds like Terry, all right." Alaya looked confused. "So he took our house on purpose?" Danielle crouched next to her daughter, trying to keep her voice steady. "Yes, baby. Some people just care more about money than they do about people." Reed looked toward the window. Outside, the sun was dipping low, casting the sky in red. He didn't say anything for a while. The men behind him waited. They'd seen that look before. The one that meant Reed Lawson was about to make something right, no matter what it took. But before he could say anything, Duke spoke up. "Reed, think about this. Vance has people, money, lawyers. You go after him, it won't just be him coming after you." Reed turned around slowly. "I ain't going after him to fight, Duke. I just want to talk, find out why he did it." Duke muttered, "Yeah, sure. And I just want to win the lottery." Reed ignored him and crouched down in front of Alaya again. "You said your mama hasn't eaten, right?" She nodded shyly. Reed stood up and grabbed his wallet. "Duke, take the boys and go get some groceries. Real food, meat, fruit, milk, not just junk." Duke hesitated, then sighed. "Yeah, all right." He motioned for two others to follow him. When they left, the apartment felt quieter. Danielle looked at Reed. "You don't have to do this." Reed shrugged. "You're right. I don't. But I am." She leaned against the counter, exhausted. "You ever feel like the world just keeps taking from you, even when you got nothing left to give?" Reed thought for a second. "Yeah," he said finally. "But sometimes it gives you a second chance to fight back. Just not in the way you expect." Danielle looked at him like she wanted to believe that. "You sound like someone who's lost something too." Reed smirked faintly. "More than I'd care to count." The sound of the motorcycles outside faded into the distance. Reed stayed behind, helping Alaya fix the bent chain on her bike while her mother rested on the couch. "Did you ever have a little girl?" Alaya asked quietly. Reed paused. "Yeah," he said after a beat. "I did." "What happened to her?" He looked away, pretending to focus on the chain. "She got sick a long time ago. Didn't make it." Alaya blinked up at him. "Oh, I'm sorry," Reed forced a smile. "You remind me of her a little. Same brave look in your eyes?" Alaya smiled faintly. "Mama says brave people are just scared people who don't give up." Reed let out a breath. "Your mama's a smart woman." A few minutes later, Duke came back with bags of groceries, arms full, face serious. He set them on the counter. "Got enough food for a week. Maybe more." Danielle looked like she might cry again. "I don't know how to thank you." Reed waved it off. "Just eat. Get some strength back." As the men prepared to leave, Alaya tugged at Reed's vest. "You gonna help my mama get our house back?" Reed looked down at her and said quietly, "Yeah, sweetheart. We're gonna try." He turned toward the door, his voice low. "We'll be back tomorrow." The engine started up again outside. Alaya watched from the window as the bikers pulled away, the roar echoing down the street. She didn't know what they planned to do, only that, for the first time in a long time, someone cared. But what Reed didn't realize yet was that Terry Vance had built his empire on fear, and crossing him was about to drag them all into something much bigger than they imagined. Night fell hard over Tuscaloosa. The streets were quiet, except for the steady hum of traffic on the main road and the flicker of a neon sign from a liquor store across the street. Reed and his crew parked their bikes outside a dimly lit garage that doubled as their hangout, a place where problems got talked through and decisions got made. Inside, the air smelled of oil, leather, and stale coffee. A few of the men sat around an old wooden table while Reed stood near the wall, staring at a photo tacked up beside a map. It was from 10 years ago. The Iron Hounds in their prime, standing side by side, grinning at the camera. And there, right in the middle, was Terry Vance. Clean-shaven, lean, confident. The kind of man who thought rules were for other people. Duke dropped a crate on the table. "You sure you want to do this, Reed? Vance ain't the kind of man you just walk up to anymore. He's got bodyguards, money, and the sheriff in his pocket." Reed kept his eyes on the picture. "Yeah, I know what he's got. I also know what he took from that woman and her kid." Another biker, Jared, leaned forward. "Man, that little girl looks scared out of her mind. Ain't no way we just let that go." Reed nodded. "Exactly." Duke rubbed his temples. "I'm not saying we walk away. I'm saying we think this through. Last time someone crossed Vance, their garage mysteriously burned down." Reed turned around, eyes cold but calm. "That was me." The room went silent. Jared's eyebrows shot up. "Wait, what?" Reed nodded slowly. "Back when I left his crew." He called it an accident. "I knew better." Duke leaned back, whistling low. "Man, you still breathing after that? You must be his unfinished business." Reed gave a half smile. "Maybe. But tonight, he's mine." He grabbed his leather jacket from the chair and slung it over his shoulder. "We're paying him a visit. Not with fists, with truth. I want to hear from his mouth why he did it." Jared frowned. "You think he's just going to tell you? The man's a snake." Reed shrugged. "Snakes talk when you corner 'em." The men followed him out of the garage, one by one. The engines came alive, the deep rumble echoing through the sleeping town. They rode through narrow streets until they reached the fancier part of Tuscaloosa. Big houses, clean lawns, and quiet porches with porch lights glowing like sentinels. Terry Vance's house stood at the end of the cul-de-sac, a modern brick home with a black SUV in the driveway and cameras pointing in every direction. Reed killed his engine and nodded to the others. "Stay back till I give the word." He walked up the path alone. The porch light flicked on as he reached the door. It opened before he could knock. Terry Vance stepped out, wearing a crisp white shirt and a smug smile. His hair was slicked back, and he smelled like expensive cologne. "Well, I'll be damned," Terry said, crossing his arms. "Reed Lawson, thought you were dead." "Almost," Reed said flatly. "You still kicking folks out of their homes, or is that just a hobby now?" Terry laughed. "I see you've been talking to one of my tenants." "Don't believe everything you hear. That woman was months behind." "Business is business." Reed took a step closer. "She had receipts. You threw her and her kid out anyway." Terry's smile faded. "I don't have time for this. You think I remember every sob story that crosses my desk? You've gone soft, old friend." Reed's jaw tightened. "You call stealing soft?" "Stealing?" Terry scoffed. "I followed the law." "She didn't pay. I evicted her. End of story." Reed stared him down, voice low. "You forged those papers, didn't you? Changed the records to make it look like she owed you." Terry's smirk returned. "You can't prove that." Reed stepped even closer, close enough to smell the cologne. "Maybe not in court, but I know the truth. And so will everyone else." Terry's expression hardened. "You threatening me?" Reed tilted his head. "No. I'm promising you." Before Terry could reply, Duke and the others walked up the path, silent and steady. 6 men in leather vests, not armed, not violent, but the kind of presence that made people rethink their choices. Terry glanced over Reed's shoulder, realizing this wasn't just a social visit. "You boys really think you scare me?" Reed smiled faintly. "Not yet." He pulled out his phone and played an audio recording. Terry's own voice came through the speaker, from a call he'd made earlier that week to one of his employees. I don't care what it takes. Make sure those papers disappear. The sooner she's out, the better. Terry froze. Reed held up the phone. One of your people sent that to me. Guess not everyone likes the way you run things. Terry's face went pale. You don't know what you're playing with, Reed. Yeah, Reed said quietly. I do. It's called justice. He turned to leave. Tomorrow, that recording goes public. You can do what you want with your fancy lawyers, but this time the whole town's going to see who you really are. As Reed walked away, Terry's voice cracked through the night. You'll regret this. Reed didn't even look back. Already do, he muttered. The bikers followed him down the driveway, engines roaring back to life. But Reed knew exposing Terry wasn't going to be the end of it. It was only the beginning. By morning, Tuscaloosa was buzzing with whispers. Word had spread fast. A recording of Terry Vance's voice was making the rounds online. Someone had leaked it to a local reporter, and by sunrise, everyone knew what he'd done. Reed didn't care who leaked it. All he knew was that justice finally had a voice. At the garage, the Iron Hounds were gathered again, watching the news on an old TV with bad reception. The reporter's voice crackled through the static. Local businessman Terry Vance faces allegations of property fraud and wrongful eviction following the release of an audio recording. The source of the recording remains anonymous. Duke grinned. Looks like your boy's about to lose more than his fancy car. Reed didn't smile. He'll fight it. He always does. Man like Vance doesn't go down easy. Jared leaned forward. So what's next, boss? We just let the media eat him alive? Reed rubbed his beard. Let them talk. Truth's out there now, but I ain't done till that woman gets her home back. The men nodded. They weren't heroes, but they knew what was right. A few hours later, Reed parked his bike outside Danielle Brooks's apartment again. The sound of laughter met him before he even reached the door. Inside, Aliyah was eating cereal for the first time in days, her cheeks full and her eyes bright. Danielle was sitting at the table, color slowly returning to her face. She looked up when Reed stepped in. You did something, didn't you? Reed smiled faintly. Maybe. She shook her head, half in disbelief, half in gratitude. I saw his face on the news. I didn't think people like him ever got caught. Reed leaned against the counter. They don't, unless someone makes them. Danielle gave a tired smile. I don't know how to thank you. Reed shrugged. You don't owe me anything. You just take care of that little girl of yours. Aliyah grinned. Mama said we might get our house back. Reed smiled. That's the plan, sweetheart. But before the warmth of that moment could settle, there was a hard knock on the door, 3 sharp hits that made Danielle jump. Reed's expression changed instantly. He moved to the door and peered through the peephole. Terry Vance stood outside. No suit this time, no smug smile, just anger, raw, shaking anger. Reed opened the door halfway, keeping his foot braced. You got some nerve showing up here. Terry's voice was low and venomous. You think leaking that recording fixes anything? You just made yourself a target. Lawson Reed didn't flinch. You already tried to burn me out once. Didn't work then. Won't now, Terry sneered. You always had that hero complex. Think you're saving the world one broken family at a time. You're still the same fool you were 10 years ago. Reed stepped forward until their faces were inches apart. And you're still the same coward who hides behind paperwork. Inside, Aliyah peeked around the corner, eyes wide. Danielle pulled her close, whispering, Stay back, baby. Terry glanced past Reed toward the apartment. That woman. She doesn't deserve your pity. She's nothing. Reed's hand twitched, but he held himself back. You ever talk about her like that again, and I'll make sure your fancy house looks like mine did after your little fire. Terry's smile returned, but it was brittle now. You just confessed to a threat. Reed stepped back, calm but firm. Call whoever you want. Just remember, everyone's watching you now. You ain't untouchable anymore. Terry's jaw worked as he tried to find words. Finally, he spat on the ground, turned, and stormed off toward his car. Reed closed the door quietly. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Danielle whispered, You shouldn't have done that. He's dangerous. Reed gave her a half smile. So am I. That night, the Iron Hounds rode together again. Not for revenge, but to make sure Vance didn't try anything stupid. They followed him from a distance, watching as police cars finally pulled into his driveway. The flashing red and blue lights painted the night like justice had finally come calling. Reed parked his bike across the street, arms folded. He didn't cheer or smile. He just watched as Terry Vance was let out in handcuffs, his once perfect shirt now wrinkled and stained with sweat. Duke whistled low. Didn't think I'd ever see that man fall. Reed nodded. He built his house on lies. Sooner or later, they all collapse. Jared looked at him. You think Danielle and the kid'll be okay now? Reed exhaled slowly. They will be. And if not, we'll make sure they are. The men stood there for a while, silent, the night air cool against their skin. For the first time in a long time, Reed felt something close to peace. But deep down, he knew peace wasn't the end of this story. It was just a small break before the next lesson life had waiting. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the thin curtains of Danielle's apartment. The space that once felt heavy and hopeless now had a quiet warmth to it, like the first breath after a long storm. Reed knocked gently before stepping inside. Alea was sitting on the floor again, but this time she wasn't clutching her bike. She was drawing on a piece of notebook paper with a broken crayon. She looked up when she saw him. "Mr. Reed," she said with a smile so wide it made him forget for a second how hard life could be. "Hey, kid," he said, his voice softer than usual. "How's breakfast treating you today?" She grinned. "I had pancakes. Mama said we didn't have to save them this time." Reed chuckled. "Good. You shouldn't ever have to save pancakes." Danielle walked out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She looked different, still tired, but lighter. "They're letting me go back to work at the daycare next week," she said, "and someone from the city called. They said my eviction was ruled invalid. Apparently, Vance messed with more paperwork than just mine." Reed nodded slowly, pride flashing in his eyes. "That's good news. Real good news." Danielle smiled faintly. "They said I might even get the house back. It'll take time, but they're working on it." Reed didn't say anything right away. He just looked around. The smell of food, the faint sound of Alea humming to herself, the sunlight touching everything it could reach. It didn't fix everything, but it was a start. Duke walked in behind him, holding a small cardboard box. "Brought a little something for the kid," he said, setting it on the floor. Alea's eyes lit up as she opened it. Inside was a brand new bike, shiny and blue, with a white bow tied to the handlebar. She gasped. "For me?" Duke grinned. "Yeah, figured that pink one's earned retirement." Reed smiled. "Besides, a brave kid like you deserves wheels that don't squeak." Alea threw her arms around him. "Thank you." Reed froze for a second, then patted her shoulder gently. "You're welcome, sweetheart." Danielle's eyes welled up again. "You men didn't have to do all this." Reed met her gaze. "We didn't have to, but we wanted to. Sometimes doing what's right ain't about what you owe. It's about what you can give." Danielle nodded slowly, holding back tears. "I forgot people like that still existed." Reed shrugged. "They don't always wear suits." The room filled with laughter. Small, genuine, the kind that feels like healing. Later that afternoon, Reed and the Iron Hounds stood by their bikes, getting ready to leave. Alea ran outside to wave them off, her new bike glinting in the sun. "You gonna visit again?" she asked. Reed smiled. "Maybe. You keep that bike shiny, all right?" She nodded eagerly. "I will!" As the engine started, Alea called out one last thing. "Mr. Reed?" He turned around. "Yeah?" "Thank you for not being scared of helping us." Reed paused, that simple sentence hitting him harder than anything else had. He gave a small nod. "You made it easy to care, kid." They rode off down the street, the sound of their engines fading behind them. Reed didn't look back, but he didn't have to. He could still hear Alea's laughter echoing in his head. Back at the garage that evening, Duke leaned against his bike. "Never thought I'd see the day we'd play heroes," Reed smirked. "We ain't heroes, Duke." "We just did what people are supposed to do," Jared chuckled. "Still feels good though, don't it?" Reed looked out toward the horizon, the last bit of sunlight fading into the sky. "Yeah," he said quietly. "It does." He thought about Alea's words again. "Thank you for not being scared of helping us." That stuck with him, because maybe that was the whole point. People weren't supposed to wait for heroes. They were supposed to be the ones who stepped in when no one else would. But little did Reed know, Alea's story, and that single act of kindness, was about to ripple far beyond their small Alabama town, changing more lives than he'd ever imagined. 2 weeks passed. The nights were cooler now, and the days felt a little softer, as if life itself had decided to slow down for a while. Reed hadn't seen Alea or her mother since that morning they'd watched him and the crew ride away. He told himself he'd check in later, but part of him didn't want to intrude. People needed space to rebuild. Still, every time he rode past that street, he slowed down without meaning to. That afternoon, Reed was at the garage, fixing a carburetor when a small knock came from the open doorway. He turned and froze. There she was, Alea Brooks, standing in the sunlight, holding something behind her back. Her braids were tidier now, her cheeks full again. "Well, look who decided to visit," Reed said, setting down his wrench. "You ride that new bike over here?" She nodded proudly. "Mama said I could come by and say thank you again." Reed smiled. "You already said that, remember?" "I know," she said. "But Mama said when people change your life, you tell them twice, once with words and once with something special." He raised an eyebrow. "Something special, huh?" She pulled out what she'd been hiding, a crumpled piece of notebook paper. On it, in messy colored pencil, was a drawing. Reed and his crew standing beside their motorcycles, with Alea and her mother in front of their little apartment. Above it, in big, shaky letters, she'd written, "My heroes." Reed's throat went dry. He stared at the drawing for a moment, his tough exterior cracking just a little. "You made this?" She nodded. "Yeah, I wanted you to have it so you don't forget me." Reed crouched down to her level. "Sweetheart, I couldn't forget you if I tried." Alea smiled. "Mama says people like you make the world less scary." He looked away, blinking hard. "Your mama's got away with words." Just then, Duke walked in, wiping his hands on a rag. "Well, if it ain't the bravest kid in Alabama." Alea giggled. "Hi, Mr. Duke." Duke grinned. "You keeping that new bike clean?" "Uh-huh." "I even named it," Reed smiled. "Oh yeah? What's its name?" "Hope," she said proudly. "'Cause Mama said hope's what keeps you going when you think you can't." The garage went quiet for a second, the kind of silence that means everyone's feeling the same thing, but no one wants to say it out loud. Reed stood, folding the drawing carefully and tucking it into his vest pocket. "That's a good name, kid. You hold on to that." Alea looked around at the bikes gleaming under the fluorescent lights. "You guys help other people too?" Reed thought for a moment. "Sometimes, but maybe we should do it more." That simple question stuck to the air like glue. Duke glanced at Reed, then at Jared. "She's got a point. Ain't no rule saying we can't ride for something bigger than ourselves." Reed smiled faintly. "Maybe that's what we've been missing all along." Alea tilted her head. "What do you mean?" Reed knelt again, resting a hand on her shoulder. "Means sometimes life gives you a reason to do better. You were ours." Her eyes widened. "Me?" "Yeah," he said softly. "You reminded us that kindness ain't weakness. It's courage," she grinned. "Mama says courage is what makes you strong even when you're scared." Reed nodded. "She's right again." Danielle's old car pulled up outside and she stepped out, waving. "Alea!" Time to head home. Alea ran halfway to the door, then stopped and turned back. "Bye, Mr. Reed. Bye, Mr. Duke. Don't forget to ride safe." Reed chuckled. "You got it, kid." They watched her go. The little girl with the pink bike that once carried her hunger, now replaced by a blue one named Hope. As the sound of the car faded down the road, Duke broke the silence. "She's something else, huh?" Reed nodded slowly. "Yeah, reminds me there's still good left out there, even when the world tries to hide it." He walked over to his bike, swung a leg over, and started the engine. "Come on, boys, let's go for a ride. Maybe there's someone else out there who needs a little help getting their hope back." The others smiled, one by one, firing up their engines. The roar of the iron hounds filled the air again, not as a threat this time, but as a promise. They rode off together, not looking for trouble, not chasing glory, just following the road wherever it might lead, knowing that sometimes the smallest act of kindness can set off the biggest change, because of one brave little girl who refused to give up, because of Alea Brooks. Kindness doesn't have to be loud to be powerful. Sometimes, all it takes is one small voice, like Elia's, to remind us what it means to be human. If you see someone struggling today, don't look away. Be the reason they believe people still care.